Hey, everybody, welcome to Bible 365. I'm Kathy Carter, and I am bringing you Acts 2 today. So, we are in the book of the Acts of the Apostles. And today I'm just going to talk about, because the Holy Spirit has come. And so, I'm talking to you guys about being surrendered to what it is that the Holy Spirit wants you to hear and wants you to do. So, stick with me as I go through the beginning of Acts 2. See you guys in a minute. Hey, welcome to Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter, and this channel is here to kind of merge Bible living with Bible literacy. So, we are going to be using the New Testament this year in order to understand what it's like to live as a follower of Christ. I have a link below in the description that I have a download that will bring you to a chronological Bible reading of the New Testament. So, what I want you to do is read every day and join me and hopefully some friends as we talk about what it means to live as a kingdom builder. Let's get started. Hey, everyone, and welcome. So we're in Acts 2. And so where we've come from is that we find out that Luke is the author of the book of Acts. It's the Acts of the Apostles. And Jesus has ascended, and all of his apostles and many others are now waiting in an upper room. So what we've seen is it's been about 50 days. And the reason I'm saying this is because of the day that's coming. So here we go. We're going to start in Acts 2. And it says, when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together. And so I think in some ways we might take this for granted, what the day of Pentecost is, because now we kind of equate it to a Christian thing, which would make sense, right? Because we get the Holy Spirit on this day, or they got the Holy Spirit on this day. But the day of Pentecost was something that the people of Israel would have celebrated all the time. And so we see that everyone is coming in from all nations. So this is what it is. 50 days after they would have celebrated the Passover. So right now we know the Passover was celebrated with Jesus. It is 50 days later. He came back 3 days after. He was here for about 40 days. And then it took them about a week to get from where they saw him ascend into where they are now, which means they were hanging out there for maybe like a day or two, right? So here we are, like timeline wise. It's been 50 days since the Passover. And so the celebration was, there were two things that were celebrated at this time. And one was the giving of the law of Moses. So on Mount Sinai, God gave Moses the law, and then Moses came down off the mountain and gave the law to the people, right? So and this lines up, right? And then the other thing is it's first fruits. So the harvest season has changed, and now it's the giving of the first fruits of their labors, right? Like, so they planted, and now it's the giving of the first fruits. So this is really important, because I think, here we go again with like, God emulates everything that he has given to us in the past. So right now they are in a room. It's a group of Israelites. They have seen Jesus, the Messiah, the God that they knew was the God and that they are following. They've seen him ascend. They were told to go wait in this room together. And now this big celebration of first fruits and law of Moses is being celebrated. So I'm hoping you can see some of these, like how these things are interconnected. Okay, so it says, when the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind. So they're all there together. And just imagine, like, this is one of those things that we need to give ourselves over in a way to this supernatural thing. And I know that's really hard. And maybe for some it isn't, but I've kind of mentioned over and over and over again, I'm starting to kind of understand more of the supernatural, because I was always very, very against anything supernatural. What happened on this plane is what happened. And if it didn't happen on this plane, it didn't happen. No ghosts, no angels, no heavenly beings, no spiritual, no miracles, no extra things that happened outside of the norm, right? The norm is what it is. It's the rule. Like, even if you believe in God, it was the rule that was given by God, and nothing extraneous, nothing outside of that would happen. Now I'm going to say that's complete. Like, I'm completely on the other side. And I think some of the things that we see and we notice, we don't always recognize as miraculous. So this noise comes in, and a lot of people might be like, man, what a rushing wind, right? So we can easily excuse it. This is that line where we go, and I was just talking with my small group about it this morning, like, why didn't the Pharisees believe? Everything lined up. It makes no sense that the Pharisees didn't believe. And I'm going to agree, like, that's true. It looks like everything, according to anything they had ever learned, lined up in a way that should have been like, oh, this is obviously the Messiah. And yet there were still people who fought to kill Jesus and who fought to kill Paul, which we're going to see later in the book of Acts. And we're, in some ways, there's like a refusal, right? Like we've deliberately put some of these blinders on to say, I don't want to believe it. If it doesn't fit in my worldview, it doesn't fit. And so just this idea of allowing ourselves to be more open to things that we don't necessarily agree with, believe in, or understand, right? Even like anything in the world, right? Politically, worldly, right? Like our country does this, but that country does that, right? Like having just a greater understanding that it's not always our own point of view and our own perspective. So this rushing wind comes in. Many would go, just a windy day, just a sound. In them, they're like, okay, now we're recognizing that there's something happening. The whole house, it said, it filled the whole house while they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire. So they're looking. And again, there's this visualization, right? That maybe not everyone saw, because we're going to continue to see that some saw, some didn't see. There's this visualization like tongues of fire. It doesn't seem like it was literally fire. Nobody was burning. And so it was something that they were seeing. They were recognizing a very visual aspect of the Holy Spirit coming down on people. It rests on each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit was giving them utterance. So this was a power from the Spirit. It was nothing that they were doing. It was a power delivered to them by the Spirit, and they started just speaking in other tongues. How can we use this tongues? It can be used any number of ways, right? It could mean they were speaking a very specific language. It could mean they were just speaking in a thing and other people understood, because it said utterances. It doesn't necessarily say they were speaking in sentences, right? Like I'm just saying we want to be open to it might not be exactly the way in which we see it. Because I was very convinced at one point that if they were speaking in tongues, it was clearly they were speaking another language that was already here on earth. Now I'm not so sure, just from the reading of it over and over again. So it says, now there were Jews living in Jerusalem, devout men, so people who loved God, right? These were devout people, and they were coming in from all nations. So there were some just in the area, right, that would have obviously understood the language spoken in the area. And there were some coming in from all over, and they list the cities later. They're coming in from all over. They do not all speak the same language, right? Some are coming in from places in Africa. Some are coming in from places like more like Turkey and right outside of Jerusalem. So if you remember when we did the Old Testament, if you didn't do it with me, go back and go check it out, especially during some of the wars. Assyria and Babylon took over the nation of Israel, and they left some people in Israel, right, to do their own thing, but they pulled some out of Israel. So we can see just literally that. There's also the idea of when this war started coming, people scattered. There were some stories where there was famine in the area. People scattered. So just because you were of a Jewish descent, because you were of one of the 12 tribes of Israel, does not mean you lived only in Israel, right? So they had scattered and they had produced people in different areas, right? So it wasn't just all living in Israel. And so we want to be aware that after multiple generations, they were speaking different languages. There's a good chance that they weren't speaking the language at all that was spoken in Israel, right? Because they had kids who had kids who had kids. And we know as people come over, so I live in the United States, and we know as people come over to the States, the first generation speaks the language. The second generation might speak the language, but there's an unlikely chance that the third generation is going to speak that language, right? There's a better chance that the third generation is going to speak English and is going to kind of morph into the American sort of heritage and the American language. And that's probably what they did there. So they're all coming in from all over. And it says, and when the sound occurred, the crowd came together and were bewildered because each one of them was hearing them speak in his own language. They were amazed and astonished, saying, well, aren't these all these people that are all speaking, aren't they Galilean? So they're not even from all over the nation of Israel. They're just mostly from Galilee. So all these dudes from Galilee, which is not the most highly of educated of places, I'm not saying it was the poorest of places, but it's not like it was the epic, epicenter of high profile education. They're all speaking different languages. That doesn't make any sense. And so again, it says that they were hearing these languages. So does that mean the other person was speaking in their language? Maybe, maybe not, right? Maybe they were just speaking and they were hearing it in their own language. Is that, and how is it that we each hear them in our own language to which we were born? And then they list all the places that they were born. Visitors, Jews, proselytes, like all these people were coming from all these other different areas. We hear them in our own tongues speaking of the mighty deeds of God. So the things that these guys are saying are all of the mighty deeds of God. And now it might be a lot of stuff that they already knew, like God brought you over from Egypt. God rescued you from the Babylonians. God rescued you from the Assyrians. God brought our nation together. God brought King David, right? So it was all of these like mighty acts of God that they were speaking of. So I'm not necessarily saying that they were speaking of Jesus. They were speaking of all the things that they would have known, but they were uttering them in their tongues. And they looked at this guy and they said, how is this guy talking about the deeds of God in my language? Right? Like standing around just shouting the things of God. And I can completely understand what it is that they're saying. But I know when I look at them that I shouldn't be able to understand them. And then it said, but others were mocking them, saying that they were full of sweet wine. So there's a group here that's going, I hear you. Oh my gosh, I can't believe all the things that they're talking about. It seems so weird. Like these guys are from. And the other people are like, why are they so drunk? They sound ridiculous. Like, man, what were they partaking of? Which would lead me to believe that they're like, blah, 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 right? Like they're speaking a weird, they don't tend to understand, like this other group of people don't tend to understand what it is they're saying. So how can one hear something and another hear something else? Have you ever been to a church service where you walk out and you say, I can't believe he said A, I'm so convicted, it really touched my soul. And the other person says, I can't believe they would have said this thing that's completely against my nature, right? So we have, and I don't want to necessarily call it selective hearing, because I kind of joke, like, I'm sure we've all done this. If you're a parent, or if you're a teacher or parent, right? Like anytime you're around kids, they have selective hearing, right? Like, oh yeah, you can hear when I say, go ahead and you can play on your video games, but they can't hear when I say, empty the dishwasher. And there really is some truth to the fact that our ears do perk up when we hear something desirous, right? Like there is this idea that we're like it, I don't know, like what's in our brain that just clicks on when it's something that we want. Oh, you want me to take you out to eat? And I'm like, oh, I'm in. But if I'm home and I'm busy doing something and someone's asking me to make dinner, I might not be as quick to hear that person. Like, what? You said that 4 times? I didn't even hear you. And so there's something, whether it's in our nature, right? Like, I don't know if that's a sin thing that we're born with, whatever it is that you say, you would have to notice in your real life that this is true. At least I hope you would have to notice. And then, so let's now bring it to the deeds of God, right? Some people were hearing and some people weren't hearing. Both of those groups of people had all come into town to worship the Lord, to come to the temple for the Pentecost, for the reading of the law of Moses, for the giving of the first fruits. So everyone in this area at this time. So, and I'm making kind of like a point of this because it wasn't like separating, oh, the Jews heard and the Gentiles didn't hear. That's not the separation here. The separation here is who could hear the mighty deeds of God and who couldn't, although both would have claimed that they are followers and lovers of God. So what is it, right? Like what is in some ways, our responsibility? So God pulled down this Holy Spirit, laid it on these people, allowed them to have these utterances, right? That many in different languages could understand. What is it that we are responsible for, right? What were those who didn't hear? What were they missing? Now, I'm going to say, like, my answer is going to be they really weren't following the Lord, right? They were doing their due diligence. They were doing their duty. They were coming to this area while they were supposed to, right? But they weren't genuinely ready in their hearts to be prepared to hear this message that was being uttered. And that, in some ways, to me, is really important. Can we prepare our hearts? I feel like we can prepare our hearts. I feel like we can be in our Bibles and be in prayer and genuinely be seeking the Lord to keep us open to hearing what it is that he wants us to hear, right? Like the messages that he's giving to us at the time he's giving them. And so I think that is where some of the drunk people, and again, this is the way that I'm reading it. So I want to say that because I don't even know if there's like, I don't know if other people would agree with this perspective, but this is where I'm coming from, because I think it's important to note that they're all, I don't want to say Israelites, they're all Jewish. So they're all believers of, like, they were all at one time of Jewish descent, of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so they had come in. And so where now for us as lovers of, as those of us who say lovers and followers of the Lord, are we hearing the message that is being given? Are we open to hearing the message that is being given? Are we surrendered to all that God has to give to us? And I'm going to tell you guys, like, coming from a personal experience, right? Like, I'm surrendered in some ways, but I'm not probably surrendered in other ways. I have grown from the day that I first started reading my Bible until today, but I'm sure I have tons of places to go, right? Like, if the Spirit gave me something right now that I wasn't kind of open to hearing, I might need more time in order to hear that message that he's giving me, right? I might not be ready for that message right now. So how can we sort of open ourselves to the message that the Lord is giving so we are prepared at the time when he gives it, right? So we're prepared to follow, we're prepared to do, we're prepared to love. So I'm going to end on that today because it's been about 15 minutes. And so I'm going to end on that note today, and we're going to continue into Acts 2 on our next recording. So if you have found this to be a blessing, I want you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And I want you to continue to read in Acts 2, and we'll pick it up again tomorrow on verse 14. See you guys next time.